What's the most unfair way someone twisted your words? When I was 17, my sister asked me what I wanted to do with my life. I said, anything, as long as I don't end up like mom. 3 days later, my mother stopped making me breakfast. Not announced, not discussed. Monday, there was a plate at my spot. Wednesday, there wasn't. My sister Renee told my mother I said I was ashamed of her, that I thought her life was small and embarrassing, that I said the word embarrassing. I never said that word. What I actually said to Renee in the driveway while we were sitting on the hood of her car was, look at mom. She gave up her residency to raise us. She stopped painting. She doesn't see her friends anymore. Dad doesn't even notice when she leaves a room. She's invisible. I love her more than anyone, but I am terrified of waking up one day and realizing I gave up everything for people who don't see me. Anything. I will be anything, as long as I don't end up like mom. Renee heard every word. She delivered 4 to our mother. He's ashamed of you. That was not what I said, but it is what my mother believed for the rest of her life. The breakfast disappeared first. Then the notes in my lunchbox stopped. She had been leaving them since kindergarten. Small squares of paper that said, proud of you, or have a good day, or just a smiley face. I didn't notice their absence until years later at 3 a.m. in a therapist's office when she asked me to name a time I felt unconditionally loved, and the first thing I said was, the lunch notes. And the second thing I said was, they stopped when I was 17, and I never knew why. My mother didn't punish me. She didn't yell. She recalibrated. Still kind, still present, still drove me to school and came to my games. But the warmth had a ceiling now. The hugs lasted 2 seconds instead of 5. The I love you at bedtime became good night. The woman who used to sit on the edge of my bed and ask about my day started standing in the doorway, then the hallway. Then she'd just call it from the kitchen. The distance grew in inches, so small I didn't feel them moving until I was standing on the other side of a room wondering when the door had closed. I tried to talk about it once. I was 23. I said, Mom, do you remember when I was 17 and I told Renee? She put her hand up. She said, I know what you said. You don't have to explain. I said, but I didn't mean. She said, it's okay, sweetheart. You were right. She walked away. She said I was right, not I forgive you. She agreed with the version of the sentence she had been given. She believed I was ashamed of her and she thought I had a point. My mother died 6 weeks ago. Bone cancer. 4 months from diagnosis. I was there every day. Renee was there when she could be. At the funeral, Renee gave the eulogy. She talked about how much mom sacrificed, how she gave up her medical career to raise 2 children, how she painted in her 20s and stopped because motherhood was her art. I sat in the second row and listened to my sister describe the exact life I had named at 17 as the reason I was afraid, and I watched 200 people nod like it was a beautiful choice, instead of the quiet erasure I had watched happen in real time from the kitchen table. I helped clean out the house. Renee took the living room. I took the bedroom. In the closet, behind winter coats she hadn't worn in years, was a plastic bin labeled K in marker, my first initial. Inside were 3 things. A stack of index cards held together with a rubber band. Each one had a word on it. Medical terminology, anatomy, pharmacology, study cards, dozens, in my mother's handwriting, dated. The most recent was from 8 months ago. She had been studying, at 71 years old, quietly, in a closet, relearning the material she abandoned 30 years ago when she left her residency to raise us. Beneath the cards was a manila envelope. Inside was a letter from a community college, dated 14 months before her diagnosis. Dear Claudia, we are pleased to confirm your enrollment in the Medical Assisting Certificate program beginning September. She enrolled. She never attended. The diagnosis came first. The third item was a letter, handwritten, my name on the front, sealed. It said, you told your sister you didn't want to end up like me. Renee told me you were ashamed. I believed her for 3 years. Then I realized you weren't ashamed. You were scared. And you were right to be scared because I was scared too. I had been scared since I was 26. And I walked away from the only career I ever wanted because your father said someone had to stay home, and I didn't argue. You said you wanted to be anything but me, and I spent 15 years thinking that was an insult. It wasn't. It was the first honest thing anyone in this family had ever said about my life. You saw me. Nobody else did. I enrolled in a program last year because of what you said when you were 17. It took me that long to hear it correctly. I'm sorry I stopped making you breakfast. I'm sorry about the lunch notes. I'm sorry I stepped back when I should have stepped closer. You were not ashamed of me. You were the only person who noticed I had disappeared. Then the last paragraph. There is one more thing you need to know. Renee didn't tell me what you said because she misunderstood. She told me the twisted version on purpose. I know this because I confronted her about it 6 months ago. She admitted she changed the words. When I asked her why, she said, because he was describing my life too, and I couldn't let him be right about both of us. Your sister heard you say you were afraid of ending up like me. She already had. She married a man who doesn't notice when she leaves a room. She stopped seeing her friends. She gave up her design career to raise her children alone. She is me. And when you were 17 and said the words out loud, she couldn't punish you for seeing it in me without also seeing it in herself. So she made sure I would never listen to you again. Because if I listened, I might have changed. And if I changed, she would have been the only one left living a life nobody chose on purpose. I put the bin in my car. I drove it home and put it in my own closet behind a duffel bag I never use. I told myself I was protecting the peace. 3 days went by. I didn't eat. Ashford noticed. He said, you haven't slept since the funeral. What happened at the house? I said, nothing. Just hard being in there. That night at 2 a.m., I sat on the hallway floor reading the letter under my phone light. And when I got to the line, you were the only person who noticed I had disappeared, I realized what I was doing. The exact same thing. My mother disappeared herself for 30 years. She disappeared her study cards into a closet. She disappeared her acceptance letter into a bin behind winter coats. She disappeared her pain into a letter she never got to hand me. And I was disappearing the letter into my own closet because I was too scared of what would happen if I let it breathe. I was becoming the thing she warned me about. I was choosing silence because silence is what this family does. Sunday, I went to my father Nigel's house for dinner. I got there early. He was sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing. He said, your mother had a system for the spice rack. Alphabetical. I never learned it. I've been standing in front of it for 10 minutes trying to find the paprika. I walked to the spice rack and found it in 3 seconds. Between the oregano and the rosemary. Claudia alphabetized by the label on the jar, and the jar said, paprika, smoked. Nigel said, you knew that. I said, she showed me when I was 12. He looked at the jar like he'd never seen it it even though it had been in his kitchen for 20 years. It wasn't cruelty. That's the thing that makes it harder. An absence so complete it looked like presence. Nigel was there every day. He sat at that table every morning, and he never once opened the spice rack and thought, I should learn how this works because my wife organized it and it matters to her. He just waited for her to hand him what he needed. Renee arrived, filling every silence before it could form. Instructions, questions, comments about the weather. She controlled the flow of the room so no one would stop and ask, are you okay? Because she already had the answer ready. I'm fine. I'm busy. Can you hand me that dish? During dinner, Renee said, so many people told me how beautiful the eulogy was. I put my fork down. I said, what did she give up? Renee said, what do you mean? Her residency, her career. You know this. I said, I know. I'm asking if you know what it cost her. The table went quiet. Renee looked at Nigel for backup. He stared at his plate. When Renee was leaving, she stopped at the front door. She turned and her face had something hard in it. She said, I was the one who was here. Every doctor's appointment, every chemo session. I held her hand. Where were you for 15 years before you suddenly showed up every day at the end? There was truth in it. I was distant for 15 years, but I didn't pull away from her. She pulled away from me, and I stopped reaching because I thought I'd done something unforgivable, and she confirmed it every time she hugged me for 2 seconds instead of 5. I said, I was exactly where she put me, Renee, and you know why. Something moved behind her eyes. Recognition or fear. Then it was gone. She turned and walked out. A few days later, I went to Nigel's house. Didn't call ahead. He was at the table. Same spot. Cold tea. The paprika still on the counter where I'd left it. I said, Dad, do you remember when I was 17 and things changed between me and Mom? He said, changed how? I said, she stopped making me breakfast. The lunch notes stopped. She used to sit on my bed and ask about my day. Then the doorway, then the hallway, then the kitchen. You didn't notice? Nigel said, your mother was a private woman. She didn't explain things to me. I said, she pulled away from me for 15 years and you never once asked her why? He said, I thought that was between you two. Teenagers say things. I put the envelope on the table. I said, Mom left this for me in a box in her closet. I need you to read it. Nigel opened the letter. I watched his face go through something I had never seen on my father. Not anger, not sadness, recognition. Like a man standing in a house he's lived in for 40 years and suddenly noticing a door he'd walked past 10,000 times. He said, she enrolled in a program? I said, she never told anyone. He found the line about himself. Your father said someone had to stay home and I didn't argue. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. He said, I said that. I remember saying that. I thought she wanted to stay home. Because she never argued. She just folded herself into the shape the family needed and kept folding until there was nothing left. He said, and Renee knew? She changed the words on purpose? I said, Mom confronted her 6 months ago. Nigel said, your sister is coming Thursday to bring me groceries. I think you should be here. Thursday, I got there an hour early. Nigel had the index cards spread across the kitchen table. He held one up. I could see my mother's handwriting from across the room. He said, tracheal intubation. She was studying this in the bedroom while I watched television in the living room 8 months ago. Then we heard tires on the driveway. Renee came through the door already talking. Dad, I got the bread you like and the low sodium. She stopped. She saw the index cards, the manila envelope. Her face shifted like a mask slipping sideways. She said, what is this? Nigel said, sit down, Renee. She looked at me. What did you tell him? I said, I didn't tell him anything. Mom did. Nigel slid the letter across the table. Renee started reading standing up, coat still on, purse on her shoulder. By the second paragraph, she had lowered into the chair. By the third, her hands were shaking so bad the paper moved. She finished and the room was silent. Then she said, she confronted me at the hospital during one of her treatments, the IV in her arm. She turned to me and said, I need to ask you something about what your brother said when he was 17. She asked me to tell her the exact words. I told her, and she said, that's not what Renee told me. And I knew she finally knew. I said, and what did you say? Renee said, I told her I changed the words because she pressed her hands flat on the table. Because when you said you were scared of ending up like Mom, you were describing my life. Exactly. The husband who doesn't see me, the career I dropped, the friends I lost. You were 17, and you named everything I was already living, and I couldn't let Mom hear it because if she heard it and it changed her, I would be the only one left. I said, so you made sure she never listened to me. Renee said, I made sure she never changed. Because if she changed, I would have had to look at my own life, and I wasn't ready. I'm still not ready. Nigel spoke. His voice was low and rough. He said, you cost me my wife, Renee. Not just him, me too. She studied in a closet because she didn't think anyone in this house believed she could be anything other than what she was, and you helped make sure of that. I said, she could. She was 71 and she enrolled in a program. She was going to start over. Renee's face crumbled. She said, she told me, at the hospital. She said, your brother saw me when no one else did, and it took me 30 years to hear what he actually said. I said, you gave that eulogy. You stood in front of 200 people and called her sacrifice beautiful. You described the exact life she was trying to escape, and you made it sound like a choice she was proud of. You knew she wasn't proud. You knew she enrolled because she wanted more, and you still stood there and told everyone it was enough. I said, you turned her cage into a monument. Renee whispered, I'd do it again. Then she covered her face with both hands and broke completely. No, I wouldn't. I hate that I did it. I hate that I'm her. I hate that you were right. I didn't forgive Renee that day. I said, I need time, and she nodded and walked out without the grocery bags still on the counter. Nigel stayed at the table reading the index cards one by one, learning for the first time what his wife had been studying in the room next to his while he watched television. I took the acceptance letter home. I bought a frame. I hung it next to a photo of my mother from her 20s, standing in a lab coat, smiling. Ashford saw it a few days later and asked who she was. I said, that's a medical student. She just ran out of time. Weeks later, Renee called. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She said, I'm looking into going back to school for design. I don't know if I'll do it, but I looked into it. I said, good. The last line of my mother's letter sits in my chest like a second heartbeat. You were the only person who noticed I had disappeared. I noticed. And now, finally, so did everyone else.